It's this really problematic Frankenstein's monster of these various threads in our society that are being woven together very powerfully. And if you were in the line of fire for this kind of stuff, like Manson and some of these others, it is a lot to face.
And there's no accountability. It's the most alarming thing. I mean, Evan Rachel Wood should be held accountable for a lot, you know, but even these little things, all of them. But the Me Too thing has become so big that they're allowed to just kind of run amok, and you can say anything, and they know like they can get away with it.
Right.
Which is terrifying.
Right. No, it's true.
Politics has infected everything into the music. I mean, we're talking about Manson, and I think it's because of Me Too, obviously has been politicized. To me, a lot of the high profile cases, the Depp one, obviously.
A lot of these Me Too cases have a lot. And I think also that attorneys have recently really started tapping into these political vibes as a way to enhance or sell their own money grabs, quite frankly. And so, for instance, one of the women suing Manson, who actually changed her story a number of times, and even changed her story from the story she provided in a 1.5-hour podcast that she did in 2021. And so one of his accusers did a podcast in 2021 where she said that the worst thing that he did to her when she was underage was he kissed her for 1 second. She actually said that, just a second. Well, then she gets an attorney named Jeff Anderson, and he has basically refashioned himself as a Me Too lawyer who is taking advantage of these look-back windows in New York and in California, by which people can sue. And so this woman is now suing Manson. But my point is that this attorney, Jeff Anderson, has really tried to connect her particular lawsuit to this larger Me Too movement. And now there's this huge, this social change, and we're finally giving a voice to the voiceless, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's this really problematic Frankenstein's monster of these various threads in our society that are being woven together very powerfully. And if you were in the line of fire for this kind of stuff, like Manson and some of these others, it is a lot to face.
That's something I keep telling people too, is like, once you've been convinced to hate someone, you can almost be tricked into thinking anything's true about them. And that's for sure with Manson, right? Like, and these little stories just become confirmation bias for the people who believe the caricature. And there's no accountability for them, which is the most alarming thing. I mean, Evan Rachel Wood should be held accountable for a lot, you know, but even these little things, all of them. But the Me Too thing has become so big that they're allowed to just kind of run amok, and you can say anything, and they know like they can get away with it.
Right.
Which is terrifying.
No, it's true. It is terrifying.
It's funny what you guys were mentioning about Manson, because that story, the very famous one about having a rib removed, is actually what I think to be one of the greatest examples of the internet before the internet. Meaning that everyone in the world has heard that story, but nobody knows who they heard it from.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it predates the ability for information to travel as fast as it does.
Yes, that's so true.
It's amazing how many people did hear that story,
everyone
too.
heard that story.
That and the Richard Gere thing.
Yes.
We don't have to go into
Well, that one's true, I think. No, I'm just kidding.
But there's just certain stories from your childhood. I mean, old wives' tales. That's who really got screwed by the internet, is old wives and these stories that you have no idea why you think it's true. And this is true in the entertainment industry as well. You hear stories about actors in movies that you have no idea if there's true. There's no way to verify whether such a thing is true. But the Manson story is still one of those things that when you think about, you're like, how?
To this day,
I was sitting against a wall at a locker somewhere, and
honestly, I was just thinking, I was in 7th grade. Like, why am I even hearing that story in 7th grade?
That's
but that's
hilarious.
what's telling me in school.
And then there was the Wonder Years thing too, right?
Oh,
the rumor
he was the actor.
Paul from the Wonder Years.
Yep. I love it.
Hey, Brett, what do you think? Having not looked into the Manson thing, you've never had a reason to, and
we've done reporting on it. Like, we talked about the doc when the doc was announced for Evan Rachel Wood. We talked about that.
I was curious, not whether you think he's guilty or not, but just how do you think things might play out this year? Do you think that he has a good chance of doing what he's evidently going to try to do, which is to become a successful artist again?
I think that we are in I call it the post-concern world, which is that you're flooded with so much information that, like, your mind is already made up, and this is true with a lot of the news that we get today. But there's so much info dump on everybody when these things come out now that I'm like, bro, what do I know? Like, one of the reasons we don't cover a whole lot of Me Too cases, especially when we have guests, is because most people who don't have time to do hours and hours and hours of research. What they're going to say is, look, I wasn't there. There is, unless you're going to show me a video of them doing it, I don't know what to tell you. Like when it comes with Hollywood celebrities, I'm like, look, is the industry full of scumbags? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But unless I see a video of the person doing it, I'm not going to say one way or the other whether I think they're guilty.
How
or not.
dare you have so much nuance to this conversation?
But like for us, it's more practical. It's like we'll cover these topics, and the guests will have nothing to say, because they're reasonable people that don't want to have to sit here and be like, well, every woman who makes these claims is lying, and every dude who's accused is, or the other one, they don't say, oh, and every dude is a scumbag,
and they don't want to get pigeonholed into that, right? Yeah.
Like that's a big part of it. So for me, like I really do find most of these cases to be this has been coming out right now because of it wasn't Jonathan Majors, but Chris Jericho, the pro wrestler Chris Jericho is going through something similar.
I didn't know he was getting Me Too.
Yeah, he is, and his is even more ridiculous. I wouldn't even be able to give you all the details. And when I look at it and you look at these things, I'm like, bro, I don't know. Like unless and somebody goes, I'm looking at this video. There's a great YouTuber named Solomonster Sounds Off. He covers a lot of wrestling, and he's very, very reasonable. And he does this video where he's talking about wait for more information, and I'm not ready to condemn anyone. And he shows you both sides pretty evenly. But then people are like, I'm going to wait for more evidence. I'm like, what evidence do you think that's going to be? Like, do you think there's a hidden camera somewhere that's going to show him doing that? Because that's not going to be a thing. Like, the best you can hope for is that you're somebody like Johnny Depp who has a recording of Amber Heard saying something so egregious that you can't dare take their side anymore. But that's the exception, not the rule.
Unfortunately,
you're not going to see a lot of that. So I just find a lot of this stuff as social waste.
That's why I think it's important. I think we're all doing this, is reporting on the public perception of these events and like how people can change the way they perceive these things as they pop up, right? Because you're not going to change minds, but maybe you can change the way they perceive the next thing.
Even and I think a lot of what we're arguing for is just a return to the presumption of innocence, where someone shouldn't feel like they have to weigh in, like kind of like we talked about with the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, and you and I are resistant to having a solid opinion on that. In my case, just because I still don't feel like I have a handle on it, really. I live here.
It's crazy. Like, we can hop on a show like IRL. The big news comes out that day about Israel or Hamas, and you talk about it, but we all know, like, that news could change tomorrow. Like, I was on that show one night when the hospital was supposedly bombed, and we're all there like, but we don't really know. We weren't there. There's video, but like that video might be old. Like,
and that video wasn't.
And the video was old, right?
It was from a different place and had nothing to do with the hospital at all. So, I think I was on the next night after that.
It's a fun time to do crazy political shows, but you have to be aware. But that same mindset applies, whether it's about war or the Me Too stuff. You have to be skeptical, unfortunately. I hate being skeptical of everything, but I think there's a war on reality.
Now more than ever. Yeah, a war on reality. And now more than ever, I think that kind of skepticism is warranted. And, I think that probably the best that we can do, like you and I, Shane, who believe that Manson is innocent, is point out to people the areas in which there is some factual evidence. No, we don't have a recording, and no, we don't have audio, but we do have a declaration from a woman who says this was a hoax and I was lying, and now I'm not. I mean, that is something, or evidence of falsified, FBI letters and things like that. Exactly. But you're not going to get, it's like you said, Brett, you're not going to, in most of these cases, you're not going to get a smoking gun. So I would be happy if people would just return to presumption of innocence. And that's why I hope that people are ready to cut Manson some slack this year with this album and recognize that they don't have the full story. And so I hope that he's able to come back. But you're right, Brett, about when you have guests on and you bring up something related to Me Too, and a lot of them say, well, I don't know. And I saw that when you talked about Manson one day, and you had a guest on who said, guys, I just don't know what happened here. And I respect that attitude. I think it's a good attitude.
Yep.
I think it's interesting. Like, you should look to the people who are outsiders and hear a take like that to let yourself know that, like, look, when this stuff comes up, most people don't have the time. Most people are in that. Absolutely. I mean, to your point about, a war on reality, that's the point, right? Is it used to be that when the news was being made, or at least this was the This is the fantasy image of what the news was back in the day, because even back in the day they had producers and editors. Your information was being curated very heavily for you. There isn't. I don't actually buy that the image of Walter Cronkite as this unbiased person who just feeds you the day's news. What news?
Yes.
There's an endless cycle of news, and I also think that contributes to the psychosis that's going on in society right now. Is the reason that Gen Z is so much more upset than everyone else is that they're being fed bad news 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, on top of social media pressures. But the idea is that, like, look, you construct the world for people with how you share your information with them, and the rational people can say, like, look, I don't know, but most people don't. They watch news very, very passively. They take it in very, very passively, and they do, to what you said earlier about your mom, they still see mainstream news sources as an authority. And I don't even necessarily like the idea of seeing them as an authority or as an enemy, though I do think that they do things that are absolutely evil. I think that they are a creator of an alternate reality, which is why I don't even engage with people politically anymore, because depending on where you get your news from, you live in a completely different reality from the person you're talking to. If you watch MSNBC and CNN, or you watch Fox, or you watch OAN or something like this, the point is it's not just that they're wrong and you're right, or you're right and they're wrong. It's that they're being fed something inherently different from you, so they've constructed a worldview that is incompatible with yours. We, for a lot of decades, had a lot of our information being fed to us from the same places, and then you formed your opinions on that based on your worldview, how you were raised around the same information. There's none of that anymore.
That's exactly right. And on my first day of class, for every class when I was teaching English, I would always bring up objectivity versus subjectivity, because no kids would know. And some of these kids were like juniors in college at that point, or sophomores.
A lot of most journalists don't know now.
No, and that's why I like to bring it up in my stories when I'm saying, like, this is me being subjective, right? Like, I'm part of the story, you know, and so this is my feelings now, and this is me trying to be objective. And what you're talking about, Brett, with Cronkite, is they were appearing to be objective, but I don't really believe objectivity. Objectivity exists in the world, but objectivity in the news is a veneer, right? Like it's impossible.
Just by virtue of how you choose your topics, you're shaping your reality for them. And we do that too.
Of course.
That's what I try to point out to people. Look, this show is like what we do is colored by our worldview. And if you like that, fine. If you don't like that, I can appreciate you going to get information from people you disagree with, especially if you're willing to have a rational discussion about it.
Exactly.
But it's
because the things you're leaving out. You could be objective in everything you're saying, but you know you've left out purposefully other things.
Absolutely.
So now your objectivity is actually subjective.
Lie by structure. Lie by structure. Lie by omission.
Yep. You're saying lying and omission goes back to the Manson thing, because it's like you almost never see Evan Rachel Wood in those papers being talked about like she forged paperwork and FBI.
Right. There's a whole other story that is left out. Well, Shane, I know you got to go. Thank you for giving us this time.
So much fun.
And and it was crazy coincidence that we got together here on Manson's birthday. But if Marilyn Manson is watching, happy birthday! Yes. And everybody, check out my channel, Colonel Kurtz 99. Check out Shane Cashman's work on Timcast, and check out Pop Culture Crisis with Brett and Mary. We've got a lot of great things going on. And then also Brett and I have our own podcast on Mondays at 9 p.m. Eastern. So check that out as well. All right. So everybody, see you later.
Later.